As the gate attendant smiled and scanned their boarding passes, Emma and Noah stepped onto the wide carpeted jet bridge that led into the first-class cabin. The air was filled with a faint tang of coffee and new leather. They could barely believe that these seats, so big they looked like small private pods, were actually theirs. Emma paused just before crossing the threshold, let out a quiet breath, and reached for Noah's hand. He gave her a nervous little grin. Somewhere behind all the excitement was the quiet ache of stepping into something entirely new, away from their parents, flying across the country from New York to Los Angeles, all by themselves. This trip was no small thing. Their father, David Anderson, who everyone knew as the CEO of a big tech firm back in Manhattan, had spent weeks organizing every detail. The 2 thick boarding envelopes had arrived in a neat package, with a short handwritten note from David. For every journey you take together, trust what you know and who you are. Emma had read that line 3 times before smiling to herself. She could almost hear her dad's steady voice, the one that always reminded them to stay true to themselves, even in places where nobody else knew their name. Settling into their wide seats, quietly tucking away their backpacks, every detail of the cabin seemed to sharpen. Emma gazed out the window as sunstripes slid over endless rows of luggage carts outside. The flight attendant stopped by, speaking gently, and offered them a choice of orange juice or water. Noah, cheeks a bit flushed, hesitated just a second before saying, "Orange juice, please." Even this simple interaction felt different with no adults at their side. Emma answered for herself too, more out of habit than boldness, but she glanced over at her brother, realizing it was already happening. They were being asked and expected to speak for themselves. As they waited for takeoff, Emma shifted in her seat and stole a glance at Noah, who was fiddling with the headset controls. There was excitement for sure. It was their first trip alone, after all of Los Angeles was waiting just a few hours away. But under the thrill, there was also a quiet nervousness, a sense that every action, from buckling their belts to choosing a movie, meant something. Their parents' empty seats beside them, reserved but unoccupied, seemed to signal that from now on, little by little, they would have to look out for themselves, make their own choices, and learn how to be comfortable, even up in the clouds. As Emma and Noah settled back into their oversized seats, the gentle hum of other passengers' voices floated through the cabin. There was something soothing in the way people spoke quietly, as if every conversation was meant for just 2 or 3 people at a time. Tucked into their little first-class nook, Emma tried not to stare, but it was impossible not to notice the men in tailored suits, 2 women laughing softly as they read through business reports on glossy tablets, and a pair of college students giggling over photos on a phone. Crew members moved with practiced calm, delivering glasses of ice water with a kind smile, or checking that every seatbelt lay flat across each lap. The atmosphere was a strange mix, gentle, almost fragile, as if no one wanted to disturb this perfect snapshot of calm before takeoff. Noah nudged Emma and gave her a look. She smirked, and they both shared that little spark of knowing only siblings can manage. They were outsiders, but in the best kind of way. It was new and exciting, and a little unreal. The buzz in the cabin made Emma want to lean forward, to take in every bit of it. Still, that peaceful feeling had a current running underneath. It was quiet, but there. Noah, eyes on the window but mind somewhere else, finally turned to Emma and asked, keeping his voice low, "Hey, do you think we're really ready for this?" He looked younger all of a sudden, less the self-assured brother who just helped her with her suitcase, and more the kid who used to peek around corners during thunderstorms. Emma heard the wobble in his question and, without missing a beat, gave him her steady look, the one she'd practiced after all those years of being the older sibling. "Of course we are," she said, her confidence an anchor for them both. "Dad would not have let us do this if he didn't think we could handle it. We have each other." The words were simple, but packed with meaning. She meant everyone. Noah visibly relaxed, and inside, Emma felt the warmth of their bond grow, even stronger. Yet as she looked around, she could not shake the sense that maybe this polished world of quiet conversations and gentle light was only a surface. For all its comfort, she wondered what might be waiting for them, not just outside the plane, but inside too, buried under all the careful smiles and polite talk. The flight was just beginning, and for the first time, Emma realized that their new independence might come with challenges they hadn't imagined. Everything seemed to be settling into a rhythm until the moment the doors at the front of the cabin swung open again. A woman stepped in with a stride that almost demanded attention. Even in a space filled with people used to being noticed, she stood out. Her name, whispered by a couple seated across the aisle, was Margaret Collins, a regular on cross-country flights, known in a world of boardrooms and upscale events around New York and Los Angeles. She carried herself with the kind of confidence that turned heads, pausing by the entrance while a flight attendant greeted her. Margaret's tailored blazer looked sharper than anything Emma had ever seen, and the look in her eyes was sharp, to match. She didn't ooze friendliness so much as authority. As she moved toward the center of the cabin, she scanned each row, calculating before locking eyes on Emma and Noah sitting near the window. There was a flicker, a pause, just long enough for everyone nearby to sense that something was up. Emma felt the change instantly. Just a second ago, two flight attendants were sharing a quiet joke, and the man behind them was reading headlines on his phone. Now, conversations tapered off as Margaret drew closer, her presence thickening the air. Noah stilled next to her, fingers tightening a little on the armrest. Margaret glanced from their faces to the names on their seat backs, clear, bold. Emma Anderson, Noah Anderson. She studied them openly, as if weighing whether they truly belonged. A few heads around them turned to see what would happen. The warmth of first class fizzled fast. Suddenly, the sense of safety Emma had been clinging to felt like a loose thread. Margaret said nothing. She didn't need to. Her raised eyebrow and almost imperceptible shake of the head spoke for her. "Who are you, and what are you doing here?" Emma's cheeks flushed as she glanced at Noah, searching for a clue, a smile, anything that would make it all okay. He tried to give her the look of confidence she had given him before, but his jaw was tight, his eyes wary. It was only a moment, but in that hush, a wave of silent judgment swept the cabin. The polite bubble protecting them had popped. Now, first class didn't just mean plush seats or fancy drinks. It meant proving your belonging in a room where every glance could be an unspoken challenge. Emma realized the real journey had started, one that had far less to do with the flight and more to do with being seen and accepted. Before Emma or Noah could gather their thoughts from the sudden hush, Margaret Collins stopped directly by their seats. She took a deep breath, then leaned toward them, her voice cool and unflinching so that everyone nearby could hear. "I am sorry, but there must be some mistake. I have always sat here in these very seats on every flight from New York to Los Angeles for years," she announced, emphasis falling on the word always in a way that made it sound like a rule written in stone. As if on cue, a few passengers glanced over, curious or perhaps relieved it was not them in the spotlight. Emma felt herself tense up. For a split second, she hoped the flight attendant would step in. But before anyone could move, Margaret continued, in her measured, pointed tone, "It's important for regular travelers to have some consistency, you understand. Why don't you let me take my usual spot, and the airline can find you another?" She stood perfectly upright, her expression making it clear she expected to get her way. Noah looked up at her, bewildered, and searched Emma's face for guidance. Emma tried to find her words, hands unconsciously gripping the armrest. She managed, "We have assigned seats. Our names are on the tickets." Her voice was steady, but inside she felt that odd shrinking sensation, as if she had become invisible right there in the open. Margaret did not even acknowledge their explanation. She looked past them, almost through them, as if these seats and the names on the screens meant nothing next to her own history, her tradition on this flight. She addressed the surrounding passengers, speaking loudly enough so the cabin could hear. "I mean, really, isn't it strange for people to suddenly appear in someone else's seat? I always sit here. That's how things have been done." A heavy silence followed, punctuated by a few awkward coughs and shifting feet. Passengers who had just been smiling moments before avoided eye contact. Emma felt heat rise in her face, and her heart thudded in her chest, realizing they were not simply being questioned, but dismissed, made to feel like imposters. This was not just about two seats on an airplane. It was about whether they were allowed to belong in this rarefied space at all, as if their presence was an error that needed fixing. That realization settled over both Emma and Noah, not just a disagreement, but a reminder that even something as basic as taking your seat could suddenly mean so much more when you were seen as the outsider. Trying to steady her nerves, Emma took a slow breath and squared her shoulders before speaking up again. She remembered what her dad used to say about standing your ground, but staying polite. With as much calm as she could manage, she looked Margaret in the eye and said, "I am really sorry, but my brother and I have these seats reserved. Our dad bought our tickets in advance. We are happy to show you our boarding passes if you'd like." Emma's voice was quiet but clear, and she slid an envelope from her pocket, just in case she needed to prove it. Noah, sitting by her side, clenched his fists under the fold-out table. He felt anger sputtering up inside him, anger not only at Margaret's words, but at the absolute confidence with which she dismissed their right to even be there. There was no attempt at understanding or apology, just the expectation that her history and status should automatically sweep everyone else aside. Noah's jaw tightened. He wanted to shout, to tell everyone how unfair this was, but instead he focused on his sister's example, strong, straightforward, refusing to be pushed out. A flight attendant in the blue and silver uniform stepped forward, her hands held out in a gesture she hoped would relax the situation. "Excuse me, is there a problem here?" she asked, her voice gentle. Emma quickly explained again, pulling out their tickets, while Margaret maintained her firm stance, cutting off the attendant's reply. "I travel this route every month. The airline always makes sure I have this seat. Ask anyone here," Margaret said, turning to the nearby passengers for backup as if they would all agree without question. The attendant tried to reason with Margaret, asking to check everyone's boarding passes and offering an upgrade on another seat. But Margaret only became more insistent, waving off solutions and making it clear she did not plan on moving. Each time a crew member spoke, she interrupted, her tone growing sharper and more dismissive with every exchange. The other passengers looked away, pretending to fidget with newspapers or headphones, but nobody missed what was happening. Emma noticed the sideways glances, the pursed lips of people who, deep down, recognized the unspoken rules at play and the privilege Margaret felt entitled to. Noah could feel the pressure of every pair of eyes, a heavy silence where nobody dared speak up for them. Even as the staff tried to mediate, this was not just about seats. Every reaction told the story of who was used to belonging and who had always had to prove it. Just when Emma thought maybe the confrontation would finally settle, Margaret's voice grew sharper. She leaned a little closer, her words loud, enough that the cabin could not help but hear. She said, "Kids like you don't understand how things work up here. People pay a lot for the comfort and respect in first class. It's not really for beginners." Her tone took on a sting that felt personal, not just dismissive. Then quietly but unmistakably she added, I've never seen teenagers like you in these seats. Maybe you should stick to where you're more used to, or where you fit in." The words dropped like stones, carrying an ugly suggestion that it was not just their age, but also the color of their skin that didn't belong on that side of the plane. For a split second, the world seemed to shrink to the little patch of carpet under their feet. The words stung, sharper than Emma could have guessed, not just because she was being singled out, but because of how intentional Margaret made it. Noah sat up straighter, his cheeks flushed with equal measures of anger and embarrassment. This was not just about seats anymore. This was about being made a target, and the feeling grew every time he caught someone turning away or pretending to read just to avoid getting involved. The silence that followed Margaret's remarks was even louder than her voice. No flight attendant moved to correct her or defend the siblings. No passenger spoke up. Instead, there were small movements. A man looking at his phone, a lady pretending to search for something in her bag, a couple tightening the blankets around their shoulders as if to shield themselves from what was happening just a few feet away. That emptiness, that lack of support, hurt nearly as much as Margaret's words. It felt to Emma and Noah like a whole room had teamed up with her just by refusing to take their side. Emma looked over at her brother, catching his eye. Without saying anything, they nodded at each other, a silent understanding passing between them. They had spent their lives hearing their father talk about standing up for what was right, about believing in themselves when no one else would. Emma felt the old lesson settle in her bones. Sometimes you have to be your own advocate, no matter who tries to push you out, no matter how alone you feel. In that moment, beneath the cold glimmer of overhead lights and the blank stares of strangers, Emma and Noah decided together they were not going to move, and they were not going to let someone else's hate define who they were or what they deserved. Just as the standoff was beginning to seem unbreakable, a new figure appeared at the front of the cabin. The supervisor, Ms. Janet Wheeler, moved with the brisk assurance of someone used to handling difficult situations on cross-country flights. She wore her navy blazer perfectly, with her hair tied back and a badge that said she was the one in charge. Emma and Noah couldn't hide their relief at first, hoping finally someone with real authority would see what was happening and set things right. Ms. Wheeler approached the group, giving Margaret a polite nod, then turning to Emma and Noah with a practiced smile. "Hi there," she said, keeping her voice low. "It looks like there's been a little confusion about seats. Normally we don't have problems like this in our first-class cabin, but I need to ask if there's any way either of you would consider switching seats, just to help us get the flight underway and make sure everyone's comfortable." Noah stared at her, realizing what she was really asking. She didn't question the facts on their tickets. She didn't ask for anyone to produce receipts or boarding passes. Instead, behind her confusion was a clear pressure to just give in, to trade what was theirs for an easy fix and a peaceful takeoff. It was not about the rules or fairness. It was about making sure Margaret's complaints didn't cause a scene or delay the schedule. Emma could feel the hope slip away, replaced by disbelief. Noah found his confidence in the moment. His voice was steady, not loud, but with the kind of edge that wouldn't be ignored. "We are not giving up these seats," he replied. "They belong to us. Our family paid for them. We are not moving because someone else thinks they're more entitled to them." He made a big effort to keep his tone respectful, but his words were clear. He met Ms. Wheeler's gaze, refusing to look away. All around, passengers watched in silence, some maybe hoping the siblings would just give up so everyone could get back to their newspapers and cocktails. Emma could sense a few people silently, rooting for harmony, even at her and Noah's expense. That stung almost as much as Margaret's words. It was clear that the flight staff wanted comfort, just not for them. Even the people hired to make things right seemed ready to bend the rules if it kept the regulars happy. The message was obvious. Sometimes standing up for yourself meant standing alone. even when those in charge were looking for any excuse not to rock the boat. The air inside the cabin grew thicker with each passing minute. It seemed like the whole world had gone quiet, waiting to see who would finally give in. Just when Emma was starting to wonder if she and Noah were truly as alone as they felt, a clear voice broke through the tension from a few rows behind. "That's enough now," called out an older gentleman in a tan blazer. He stood, steadying himself against his seat. "These young people have as much right to be here as anyone else. They showed their tickets. Let them be." A ripple spread through the cabin. For the first time, someone outside the Anderson siblings had pushed back at the sense of entitlement swirling around Margaret. The man, who looked like he'd flown this route more times than he cared to count, kept his eyes on Margaret and the flight staff. "Respect is supposed to go both ways," he said, softer now, but firm. "Let's not pretend civil rights or courtesy depend on frequent flyer miles." In that moment, a thin layer of hope coated Emma's frustration. Maybe fairness was still possible, if only someone was brave enough to point it out. Even so, Ms. Wheeler remained set on clearing the way for what she thought would bring peace. She and the attendant, Mr. Stephen Brooks, his name badge neat against his shirt, looked at each other and then back at the siblings. "We understand the situation is uncomfortable," Mr. Brooks said, his words carefully chosen so he would not seem to take sides. "But we really need your cooperation so we can depart on time. If you refuse to move, there's a chance the flight may be delayed, and no one wants that." Noah could barely believe it. His hands shook against his knees, and when he tried to answer, his voice faltered. "This isn't right," he managed, eyes wet with injustice. "We did nothing wrong." But then Emma reached for her brother's hand, squeezing tight. Her calm was almost startling. She spoke simply, for all to hear. "We are not giving up our seats. We paid for them and followed every rule. We're not going to let anyone else tell us we do not belong." For a heartbeat, everyone stared at the siblings, some with sympathy, some with discomfort. The moments dragged on, heavy with judgment and helplessness, as it dawned on the whole cabin that something had to give. The silence after Emma's words was different this time. Less an absence of noise, more a thin, collective hope that maybe, just maybe, decency could win, if only for a moment. Escorted by Miss Wheeler and Mr. Brooks toward the rear of the plane, Emma and Noah moved quietly, not bowing their heads, but casting determined glances ahead. The shuffle down the aisle felt like being swept from center stage to the shadows, yet neither of them would call it defeat. It was more like pausing before the next move, time to gather themselves, catch their breath, and figure out what needed to happen. In the cramped space by the galley, surrounded by coffee pots and rolling carts, they stood side by side, not saying much at first. The hum of the engines blended with the soft murmurs from flight attendants, making it all feel far away, like none of it could truly touch the solid wall of connection between brother and sister. Emma pulled out her phone with steady hands and called their father, David Anderson. Every ring was a countdown pushing her hope forward, until his familiar voice answered. Quickly she explained what happened. She described the confrontation, the refusal to be treated fairly, and how no one seemed interested in doing the right thing. There was a hint of worry in her voice, but underneath it was a strength she'd learned from him. As she spoke, Noah leaned closer, resting an arm lightly on her shoulder, listening to every word. Their dad did not interrupt. He listened, and when Emma finished, he responded with calm assurance. "You did the right thing standing your ground. Do not let anyone make you feel small, no matter who they are. I will make some calls. Whatever happens, remember you belong in those seats as much as anyone. Keep your heads high, and do not move unless it's truly your choice. I am proud of both of you." That was all it took. The words wrapped around them like armor, pushing out the doubt and sorrow that had crept in earlier. Noah looked over at Emma, and for the first time since it all started, a small smile tugged at the corner of his mouth. They stood a little taller. With fresh resolve, they thanked the crew for their concern and walked calmly back down the aisle, ignoring the glances of other passengers. When they sat, it was not out of entitlement, but out of certainty. This was not a reckless act. They had every right to be there. Emma and Noah Anderson returned to their seats, this time carrying not just the hopes of their family, but a new sense of their own strength. Back in New York City, David Anderson was not one to waste time when it came to his kids. Well before, he heard Emma's worried voice. He had been sitting at a massive polished table in a sleek conference room overlooking downtown, surrounded by high-powered executives. Some of them were tossing around numbers with the word billion like it was nothing, their conversations focused on quarterly earnings and international expansions. Yet, when his phone buzzed and he saw Emma's name flash across the screen, he barely hesitated. He stood up, excused himself in a steady voice, and walked out mid-discussion, not caring how surprised his colleagues looked. Family came first. No title or deal was bigger than that. Once outside, David wasted no time. He dialed directly to the chief executive officer of Sky American Airlines, a connection earned from years working at the top levels of major finance and aviation boards. With zero patience for automated recordings or polite small talk, he got straight to the point. My children are currently on board Flight 647 out of LAX. They've been mistreated and are being asked to leave first-class seats that were purchased legally and in good standing. I expect your immediate attention. This is not just about my family, it's about how your airline treats its passengers. I want this fixed, and I want to hear about it from you, not a PR person. The director, who had long known David's reputation for directness and integrity, knew not to stall. Within minutes, a chain of urgent calls zipped through the airline's internal branches, from the boardroom to the airport's operations chief, through to the regional supervisor, and then straight to the flight deck of Emma and Noah's plane. The issue had been bumped so far up the chain that no one could ignore it anymore. Suddenly, the question of who should be sitting in those seats was no longer a judgment call for convenience or appeasing frequent flyers. Now, it had turned into a corporate priority with eyes on it from the highest offices. For Emma and Noah, there was no warning that far away, someone who loved them was making sure their dignity was non-negotiable. As the plane sat on the tarmac, its fate was shifting. What happened next would be about rights, not comfort. And for the first time in a while, hope hung thick in the air, waiting for the new course to be set. Inside the plane, the air felt strange, heavy and expectant. It seemed as if time itself slowed down. Passengers shifted in their seats, glancing toward the front, murmuring about why the delay was dragging on. It was not just restlessness or routine impatience. A disturbance, something out of the ordinary, was happening right before their eyes. After nearly 20 minutes of uneasy calm, the cabin doors clicked open again. Instead of more flight attendants or another round of apologies, two senior representatives from Sky American Airlines stepped in. They wore dark suits with crisp shirts, no flight pins or casual smiles, just the kind of look that said they were not regular airline staff. They did not waste time introducing themselves or exchanging pleasantries. There was a seriousness to the way they moved, almost like judges entering a courtroom. Their arrival changed everything. The crew snapped to attention, and even Margaret, who had been holding court loudly near the window, quieted down. The older man of the pair, Mr. Charles Bennett, addressed the cabin in a steady voice. Ladies and gentlemen, we apologize for the disruption to your flight experience. An important issue has been raised, and it is our responsibility to ensure the fair treatment of every passenger, regardless of age, background, or any other factor. He then turned to Ms. Wheeler, Mr. Brooks, and finally Margaret. Contracts and rules are not flexible when it comes to the basics. These seats were legally purchased by the Anderson family. No passenger or staff member has the right to deny these children what their tickets guarantee. His tone left no space for argument. He clearly wanted everyone to understand that tradition or personal opinions would not protect anyone this time. Mr. Bennet asked each person involved to account for their actions. It was not a friendly chat. He made it clear that simply trying to keep peace or avoid hassle was not an excuse for inaction or complicity. Every person who had failed to step up for Emma and Noah, whether by direct involvement or silent acceptance, now faced real scrutiny from people with the authority to enforce real consequences. The message was stark. Peace could not come at the cost of what was right. The company's name and reputation were now in the balance, and none of the old, unwritten codes or usual shortcuts could erase what had happened. The future of the crew, and even Margaret's comfort, now depended on a standard far bigger than simply getting to New York on time. As everyone sat in tense anticipation, the two new executives, Ms. Miranda Foster and Mr. William Chan, methodically made their way forward, carrying tablets and a thick folder with details of that day's passenger list. They spoke quietly with the gate agent, checked the reservation logs, and then addressed the entire cabin, so there would be no more room for confusion or excuses. Ms. Foster's voice was clear and steady, echoing just enough that even the back rows could not miss a word. The official Sky American Airlines system shows, without any doubt, that seats 2A and 2B were purchased and assigned to Emma Anderson and Noah Anderson. This is not open to debate. These seats are theirs, by contract and by law. She paused, her gaze moving over the flight crew and then to Margaret, whose face had flushed deep red. The effect was immediate. For the first time, all the whispers and casual side glances disappeared, leaving behind a silence that felt both sharp and strangely freeing. Even those who had sided with Margaret, or who had privately assumed the siblings would end up shuffled elsewhere, could see that the story had reached a moment of no denial. The illusion that old habits, connections, or personal status could override what was right suddenly collapsed. Mr. Chan stepped in, adding plainly, "Our apologies to Emma and Noah Anderson for the unnecessary distress. To our crew and passengers, let this be clear. No one's privilege, no matter how long-standing, is a substitute for respect or the rules we all agree to follow." There was no scolding in his voice, just a firm reminder of the line between status and fairness. Margaret's discomfort was obvious. Her posture slumped and she tried for a moment to defend herself, but no one seemed willing to listen. The directors did not linger on her embarrassment. Their focus was not on shaming, but on making a point that resonated with everyone on board. Power, for once, was used to correct rather than to exclude. Emma and Noah exchanged glances, both absorbing the strange sense of relief in the silence. People around them seemed to breathe easier, the power shift clearing long-held tension as quickly as it had built. With the matter finally settled, respect was restored in a way that felt real, not just performed. The Anderson siblings sat quietly, knowing they had more than just their seats back. Something deeper had changed in the way everyone saw one another, and in what would be accepted moving forward. Everyone sat in stunned silence, unsure of what could possibly come next. The weight of the moment pressed on the cabin as Mr. Chan stepped into the aisle for everyone to see. He spoke without raising his voice, but his words carried across every row. After careful review, Sky American Airlines has decided, effective immediately, to revoke Mrs. Margaret Collins' Platinum Elite privileges due to her unethical and discriminatory behavior today. The sentence seemed to echo. The idea of someone so long at the top of the airline's hierarchy being stripped of privilege in public was almost unthinkable. People looked at each other, whispering or simply gawking, and even the flight attendants paused in their tracks. It was more than just a punishment, it was a signal that old rules, unwritten or not, were done. Margaret, who had always worn her status like armor, now sat quiet and still, her expression frozen somewhere between disbelief and anger. The loss was not subtle, it was total. No more first-class upgrades, no access to elite lounges, not even priority boarding. As far as anyone could remember, nothing like this had ever happened on an American flight. Mr. Chan's message was precise, and it did not stop there. He nodded to Ms. Foster, who addressed the staff at the front with equal clarity. Ms. Linda Wheeler and Mr. Stephen Brooks, you are immediately suspended pending further review for your failure to protect passengers' rights and dignity today. Crew responsibility is not optional, and silence in the face of injustice is complicity. Wheeler's eyes welled up and Brooks looked down, accepting what was happening, but knowing deep down that this was more than a simple warning. There was no debate, no quick apologies to lessen the blow. This was not about making a show or saving face for the company. It was firm, clear, and final, a commitment to change right out in the open. The rest of the passengers, who might have once worried about siding with the powerful, let out a collective breath. The air finally felt different, lighter, fairer, maybe even a bit hopeful. Emma and Noah sat very still, processing everything. Around them, people began to murmur words of support, and for the first time, looked at them not as outsiders, but as equals. True change, the kind you could actually feel, seemed possible, right there as the plane finally prepared for departure. For a long moment after the announcement, Margaret Collins just sat frozen in her seat, as if unable to process what had happened. Her hands gripped the armrests so tightly her knuckles went white. Then all at once the shock turned to anger. She shot upright and began yelling, her voice rising above the soft chatter that had started up again after the tense silence. "This is outrageous. I demand to speak to the captain immediately. You people do not understand who I am." Her words did not have the same impact as before. There was no deference in the faces turned toward her, no hidden support from the crew, only a collective discomfort as the outburst continued. Some passengers turned away, embarrassed by the spectacle. Others glanced at Emma and Noah with a kind of apologetic look, as if in silent sympathy for everything these two had gone through since the flight began. Margaret's anger spiraled into desperation. She pounded her fist on the armrest and rattled out a stream of demands, insisting a supervisor call air traffic control, threatening lawsuits, and proclaiming family ties to senators and Fortune 500 CEOs. But without her status, she sounded more desperate than authoritative, her power draining away with each shouted phrase. Into this mess, Captain Benjamin Reynolds emerged from the cockpit. He was a tall, calm man in his early 50s, with years of service flying routes from Los Angeles to New York and everywhere in between. His arrival brought instant calm, his presence grounded and commanding without needing to raise his voice. He stopped beside Margaret's seat, looked her in the eye and spoke in a level but unmistakably firm tone. "Mrs. Collins, I've been briefed about the situation. On this aircraft, respect and order are not up for negotiation. You have had your say, but your privileges have been revoked, and these are the final instructions from the senior management of Sky American Airlines. Now, please return to your seat, fasten your belt, and allow us to continue preparations for departure." For once, Margaret had no response. You could see the fight drain from her as Captain Reynolds stood his ground, not angry or rude, just resolute. The rest of the passengers let out a silent sigh of relief. With the captain's words, it was finally clear that on this flight, rules and respect mattered more than anyone's name or history. Captain Reynolds remained by Margaret Collins' side just a moment longer, his eyes steady but not unkind. In a voice everyone could hear, he said, "Mrs. Collins, I must be absolutely clear. If there is any further disruption from you, I will have no choice but to remove you from this flight. These are the rules not just of our airline, but of every flight in the United States. I expect your cooperation." He nodded once, his message unmistakable. Margaret tried to hold on to her old composure, but it was clear the warning had finally registered. She sat back down, jaw tight, the heat in her glare smothered by the seriousness of the ultimatum. Around her, the previously stunned passengers exchanged glances. The entire mood had shifted. A realization settled over the rows of seats. Ignoring unfairness or letting things slide only keeps the chain of injustice alive. The silence that followed was not tense, but full of understanding and a hint of relief. There was a quiet sense that everyone had turned a page together, deciding that letting someone misuse power was no longer acceptable here. A few people couldn't help but show their appreciation. In the rows behind first class, a light smattering of applause broke out, nothing over the top, just a discreet recognition of what Captain Reynolds had done. He gave a brief nod and disappeared back toward the cockpit, not basking in attention but simply doing his job. For Emma and Noah Anderson, witnessing all of this unfolded was surreal but also grounding. They sat quietly, holding their feelings close. Emma glanced over at Noah and managed a small, careful smile. They did not need to join in the applause or tell anyone how they felt. Instead, they understood something much deeper had happened that day. The real win was never about seeing someone embarrassed or stripped of privilege in front of others. It was about seeing what was right restored, even if the process took longer than it should, and hurt along the way. They realized, in that moment, that some victories are silent. A shift in mood, a new standard set, a promise that things could be fairer for whoever came next. As the engines hummed to life and takeoff checks began, Emma and Noah did not say much, but inside, they both knew the most important change was the one that could not be seen. As the tension in the cabin started to settle, it seemed like Margaret Collins might finally resign herself to her new reality. But just as the engines whined and everyone started to relax, she made one last stand. Pulling her Platinum Elite card out of her designer purse, she held it up high, waving it at anyone who would look and speaking loudly as if she could will her status back into existence. "You're making a mistake. You have no idea what this means. This card, this title, everything I've done for this company. I demand my privileges be restored right now." Her voice was strained, ringing out over the hum of passengers, settling in for what they hoped would be a trouble-free flight. Every word only seemed to further drain what little support she might have had. Instead of sympathetic looks or whispers in her favor, she found blank faces, people focusing on their books, screens, or each other. It was as though everyone in that cabin had decided all at once that her power was simply no longer relevant. The silence around her was almost louder than her protest. Without waiting for further theatrics, Mr. William Chan, the regional director, moved with quiet authority to her row. He stood before her and, with a voice as direct as it was calm, said, "Mrs. Collins, you are hereby removed from this flight, and all Platinum Elite privileges with Sky American Airlines are permanently revoked. Our decision is final. Please, gather your belongings. Airport security will escort you as soon as we are ready." There were no gasps, no one shifting to come to her side. Even the flight attendants looked on with a sad kind of acceptance, knowing the right thing was finally being done. Facing this cold indifference from people who once treated her like royalty, Margaret's shoulders dropped. She tried to meet someone's gaze, anyone who would offer comfort or protest, but found only a row of averted eyes and tightened lips. All her old power felt hollow now. As she gathered her things in shaky hands, she seemed much smaller than before. For the first time, Margaret tasted real isolation, the kind reserved for those who use their position to step on others, and now watched their kingdom slip away in total silence. With no allies left, her departure was just another step forward for everyone else, a clear break from a past where titles mattered more than what was right. Not long after William Chan delivered his decision, 2 uniformed security officers boarded the plane, their movements calm and professional. They made their way down the aisle, drawing every eye without saying a word. Margaret Collins, clutching her purse and carry-on, tried to rally with more protests. "You'll be hearing from my lawyer. This entire airline is finished," she shouted, threatening lawsuits and vowing revenge, but her voice no longer had the weight it once did. The officers didn't flinch. They simply explained in an even tone that she needed to leave with them. She stalled a moment, trying again to find someone willing to support her, but met only the determined faces of the security staff and the cold quiet of people moving on. The entire process took only a few minutes, but as Margaret made her way down the aisle, her designer heels clicking on the floor, the feeling inside the cabin changed in a subtle, unmistakable way. The arguments, the tension, even the dread that had built up earlier seemed to vanish with each step she took toward the exit. The closing of the cabin door behind her sounded almost like a sigh of relief. In that moment, the airplane finally felt open to everyone again. No special boundaries, no unspoken lines someone could not cross, just a space shared by ordinary travelers with a common goal. Back in their seats, Emma and Noah Anderson sensed the change too. Where before it felt like everyone's eyes were darting, afraid of being caught up in the conflict, people now seemed ready to move on. Overhead bins clicked shut, seatbelts were fastened, and someone even let themselves laugh at a silly conversation. Happening further back, there was a feeling that something big had ended, and something lighter might be possible next. But Emma and Noah did not dwell on the spectacle. They exchanged a quiet look, understanding without saying a word that what had taken place went deeper than a single flight or a personal dispute. The whole episode had etched itself into the memory of everyone there, not with dramatic speeches, but with the quiet power of fairness regained. The plane was just a plane again, ready to taxi to the runway, but filled with passengers who now believed that the rules could actually mean something. It was just another trip now, but the lesson, silent and strong, would travel with each of them long after they landed. With the chaos behind them and the cabin restored to calm, a new kind of atmosphere settled gently over the flight. People seemed to sit up a little straighter, no longer worried about what might happen next. In the middle of this newfound quiet, William Chan, the executive director of Sky American Airlines, made his way up the aisle and stopped where Emma and Noah Anderson were seated. His expression was serious, not just out of duty, but with a sense of responsibility. Taking a deep breath, he spoke so that those nearby could hear. "Emma, Noah, on behalf of Sky American Airlines and everyone who works here, I want to extend my deepest apologies for what you experienced today. This should never have happened, and we are making immediate changes to ensure fairness and respect on every single flight. Our training programs are being reviewed, our reporting system is being improved, and you have my personal commitment that we will not ignore discrimination. Thank you for your patience, and I am sorry that you had to be the ones to force us to confront these issues." Passengers sitting nearby listened closely, some nodding and others quietly reflecting. The statement was clear and didn't try to make excuses. There was a genuine effort to turn a bad moment into a step forward for everyone. Noah nodded in acknowledgement, but it was Emma who answered, voice steady and calm. "Thank you, Mr. Chan. The apology is appreciated, but what really matters is change. No one should have to go through what we did, not here, not anywhere. I hope your actions show that it can get better from here." Her words lingered in the air, simple but powerful. For the first time, many adults on board looked at each other, a little uncomfortable, maybe realizing how easy it was to stay silent when things got tense. It was a gentle call to think, to notice, to not turn away. The next time something unfair happened, even among the crew, you could see new resolve, a promise, silent but real, to spot injustice early and do more than just watch from the sidelines. The flight was quiet for a while after that, but the quiet was not heavy anymore. There was a sense that something had shifted, that everyone present had been shown a different way forward. Some passengers turned thoughtful, others encouraged by what they'd witnessed, all carrying something new as the journey continued. After the announcement from Mr. Chan and a moment of collective reflection, the captain's voice gently broke. The silence. Cabin crew, prepare for departure. There was a brief flurry as seatbelts were buckled and trays snapped shut. The engines hummed a little louder, rolling the plane toward the runway. Soon, the familiar surge of takeoff pressed everyone gently into their seats. For Emma and Noah Anderson, it felt like more than just a plane leaving the ground. It was as if the journey ahead suddenly held new meaning. As the plane lifted into the early afternoon sky, Noah glanced across the aisle and caught a smile from a woman who had earlier avoided eye contact. Emma noticed an older gentleman who hadn't said a word through any of the drama, now offering an encouraging nod. A young flight attendant, eyes bright and voice quiet, paused as she passed their row. "Thank you both," she said softly. These small gestures scattered around the cabin were quiet but tangible. They didn't need speeches or applause. The acknowledgement was enough. For the Anderson siblings, it was clear their handling of everything, from beginning to end, had done more than earn polite respect. They could sense in the way people looked at each other and at them the small but important shifts. Their resilience in the face of public pressure had sparked something deeper. It was more than admiration. It felt like the start of something new, a ripple effect that reached beyond the walls of the plane. Meanwhile, back on the ground, Daniel Anderson sat in his office at the Justice League Foundation, his eyes locked on his phone as he waited for news. When the message finally arrived, confirming that Emma and Noah were safe, treated fairly, and that the matter had been resolved, he let out a long sigh. The emotion in his voice was unmistakable when he later called his wife. "That is all I've ever wanted for our kids," he said. "Not special treatment or privileges, just justice." The plane climbed higher, passing fluffy clouds and into clear blue. Though Emma and Noah did not see the world change from their small windows, they knew it had, if only a bit. Two teenagers flew on toward their destination, but with them, new hope and bigger possibilities now traveled through that open American sky. A few days rolled by, and what started as a tense flight had become headline news across the United States. Local stations ran interviews with passengers who had seen everything firsthand, and posts on social media were filled with support for Emma and Noah Anderson. Even national newspapers picked up the story, calling it a wake-up call for big companies. Everywhere, people debated the events in coffee shops, at schools and in offices, each person bringing their own perspective, but most agreeing it was time for real, lasting change. Sky American Airlines wasted no time responding to the national attention. The company's president held a press conference, live-streamed online and covered by major networks, where he laid out their plans to fix what had gone wrong. He promised a new set of company-wide policies and thorough anti-discrimination training for every employee, from ground staff to pilots. More importantly, the company issued a formal statement calling the incident a turning point, finally recognizing that old habits had to give way to real respect for everyone. Their message was clear and direct. This would never be allowed to happen again. Back in their quiet house outside Boston, Emma and Noah sat at the kitchen table, mugs of tea in hand. The flurry of calls, interviews, and news stories had finally settled, leaving them some space to breathe and think. They talked about how strange it felt to have been at the center of something so big, and how each decision they made on that flight seemed small in the moment, but turned out to matter a lot afterward. As they shared memories of that tense afternoon, they realized they had helped shift an entire corporation's way of working. They had also nudged people everywhere to look closer at their own behavior, maybe to speak up the next time injustice showed up, even if it felt easier to say nothing. What struck them the most, though, was something deeper than all the headlines. Dignity, they now believed, was never something to be bargained for or postponed, no matter who pushed back or questioned their right to it. The strength they found in doing what was right, especially when almost every part of the system seemed to push back, left a mark on them that would last longer than any news report. For Emma and Noah, the real victory wasn't just in changing rules, but in discovering that true courage meant holding on to fairness, no matter the odds.